Morning, everyone. Glad to see so many of you out this morning. Everybody feeling okay? Good? Good? All right. Let's, I forgot to ask. Sam, would you mind reading for me? Would you? Appreciate that. All right, to kind of briefly review where we've been, on Wednesday, Keith taught the class and talked about one of the things that prevents us from transforming as we should is pride. And he asked a couple of questions. How do we know when pride is taken over? And what are the origins of pride? We talked a little bit about both of those things, about selfishness, about feeling of self-importance being an origin of pride, about comparison can lead to pride. And he talked about how if we forget that we're saved, if we think that we really don't need saving, or we really didn't have any issue that needed correcting, that's a source of pride. There are a lot of great comments, a lot of great feedback as we look back over the last few lessons and topics that we had covered. So I'm just going to leave it right there for review. There was plenty done on Wednesday, and it was awesome. But this morning I'd like to talk a little bit about transformation in a different way. This is a little bit different from some of the other topics that we've looked at. And I wasn't really sure how to bring this up or get into it. It's just a little bit different. So let's just dive right in. We're talking this morning about the transfiguration. As we start to think about transforming our lives, I thought it would be worthwhile to look at the change, the transformation that Jesus himself goes through. And while that's an outward physical transformation, I think there's some lessons there for us that we can pick up on. So Sam, sorry to put you on the spot. Would you mind reading the first passage? This is told in three different passages. First in Matthew 17, and if you guys want to follow along, you might put your finger at each one of these. You can kind of flip back and forth between them as we look at each one. But Sam, if you don't mind reading that first passage in Matthew 17, then I'll read the second, and then you can read the third in Luke 9, if that's all right.
And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with them. And Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Rise and have no fear." And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, "Tell no one of the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead." And the disciples asked him, "Then why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come?" He answered, "Elijah does come, and he will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hands." Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist.
All right, thank you. Flipping over to Mark 9, starting in verse 2. Mark 9, starting in verse 2. And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became radiant, intensely white, as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. And a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud, This is my beloved Son, listen to him. And suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them, but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, he charged them to tell no one what they had seen, until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what this rising from the dead might mean. And they asked him, Why did the scribes say that first Elijah must come? And he said to them, Elijah does come first to restore all things. And how is it written of the Son of Man that he should suffer many things and be treated with contempt? But I tell you that Elijah has come, and they did to him whatever they pleased, as it is written of him. Now, flipping over to Luke chapter 9. Sam, if you would.
Now about 8 days after these sayings, he took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face was altered, and his clothing became dazzling white. And behold, 2 men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and those who were with him were heavy with sleep. But when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men who stood with him. And as the men were parting from him, Peter said to Jesus, Master, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, not knowing what he said. And as he was saying these things, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. And a voice came out of the cloud, saying, This is my Son, my chosen one. Listen to him. And when the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silent and told no one in those days anything of what they had seen.
All right, so 3 accounts of the same event. I'd like to kind of go through the high points of these and look at some of the similarities and some of the differences that are brought out in these 3 versions of this. But first, where did this take place? Just before this, in each of these, they record Peter's confession. And in Matthew's account, and maybe Mark's as well, I don't recall, it says they were in the district of Caesarea Philippi. That's Matthew 16, verse 13. So if you're looking at a map here, you can see down in that lower section, it's indicating we're quite a bit up north from where they would normally be. There is Caesarea Philippi there. It had kind of traditionally been thought that the transfiguration took place on Mount Tabor, but later they thought, well, this Mount Hermon is a much more likely location for that, given its proximity to Caesarea Philippi. You can see there's the Sea of Galilee there, so they're quite a bit up north, and then there's the mountain just north of there. Here's another view of that, zoomed in a little bit. This seems like a likely place for it to have taken place, but obviously we don't know for sure. I think it's interesting as we start to look at these differences here that Jesus takes 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John. Any thoughts on why he would only take 3 with him? Now he does this occasionally, right? These are kind of the special 3, kind of the inner circle there with Jesus. He does this again, notably in the garden when he goes to pray. All the disciples go with him, except for Judas, of course, and then he takes just these 3 a little bit further But what do you think? Is there any thoughts on why he only takes 3 to witness this? No wrong answers necessarily. We don't know for sure. Same? Yeah. Okay. The same as, well, maybe they had more to learn. Maybe there's specific things that he's trying to show these 3 men that they need to learn. Yeah, good idea. Any other thoughts? Okay. The others may have been teaching in other places, yeah. In Matthew's account at least, they're right after this, Jesus comes back down and ends up healing a boy that the other disciples weren't able to heal, but it does indicate they were at least trying. They were busy doing some of that. Yes, sir? All right, so that's a good point. The law requiring 2 or 3 witnesses to an account to be verified. You wouldn't just take the word of one, right? Yeah. Giving credit where it's due back there? Yeah, very good. So, yeah, we don't know for sure, of course. It seems to me like this would be an important thing for all of them to see, but obviously that's not what Jesus had in mind. I think it's interesting, Luke mentions that they went up on the mountain to pray. Now, Luke gives us a little more context about what's going on. Matthew and Mark's accounts seem to indicate that they're going there just for this purpose, but Luke says he's going up on the mountain to pray. Now, this is something that Jesus frequently does, right? He would go off by himself to a quiet place. Sometimes all night he's up on a mountain praying. That seems to be kind of the impetus of how this starts out. He goes up on the mountain to pray. I thought it was interesting that John, one of the 3 who actually witnesses this, does not record an account of this. Any thoughts on that? If you want to flip over, some think that this is what John's referencing in John 1 and 14. Let me read that to you briefly. John 1 and verse 14, it says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." All right, so John could be thinking about a lot of things there, but this idea of his glory, we've seen his glory, that'll be brought up again later. But yeah, interesting that John does not record this, given that he's one of the 3 that's there. There's going to be this idea that's similar to what we've seen before. Where else does a man of God go up on a mountain and meet with God in a cloud? Moses, right? That's right, Mount Sinai. So in Exodus 31 and again in 34, Moses is going to go up and meet with God in a cloud. Matthew seems to draw on this idea in particular with some of what he has to say. But 3 disciples going with Jesus up on the mountain to pray. We read that he's transfigured. And what does that mean? Well, just he was transformed in some way. They all record something about his clothing becoming white. Matthew says, in particularly, he became as light. He says that his face shone like the sun. Matthew's the only one who records his face shining like that. This makes me think, again, of Moses. Remember there in Exodus 34, he goes up. This is the second time he has to carve his own tablets and goes up and meets with God. When he comes back down, his face is shining and everyone's afraid. They're afraid to come near him, and he calls them to him. He doesn't even realize himself that this is happening at first, but he's been, almost face to face with God, as it were, and his face is shining. But Matthew here, kind of making the comparison that that Moses' face was shining in the same way that the moon shines, right? It doesn't produce its own light. It's reflecting the light of the sun. But here, Jesus, his face is shining. He's not been with the Lord. He's transformed, and it's him shining. He is the sun in this example. He is shining in his face. Mark records that it was radiant, intensely white. He says, as no one on earth could bleach them, right? A lot of jealous laundry mats over how white Jesus' clothes are here. This would be a spectacular thing to see. And then Luke says, as he was praying, as Jesus was praying, it says, his face is altered, his clothing, he says, is dazzling white. And Luke also mentions glory, the glory of Jesus here. Which makes me think again, Moses says back in Exodus 33, he says, show me your glory. Right? And God says, well, I'll pass by, but you can't see my face, and no man can see my face and live. But Moses asks, show me your glory. And here they are witnessing the glory of Jesus. All right, the next thing that happens is Moses and Elijah appear. And all three of them record that they are talking with Jesus. Now, this must have been quite a sight. Luke says, I always kind of wondered about this. I always thought, what are they talking about? But Luke actually gives us a clue to that. Luke says that they spoke of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. What are they talking about? What's his departure that he's going to accomplish at Jerusalem? His death on the cross, right? So it's interesting that Luke says departure. The word there for departure, he's talking about his death. What word is he using? He's using the word exodus. His exodus that he's about to accomplish at Jerusalem. That's an unusual way to describe death, but Luke obviously has a point that he's trying to make. And one of the commentaries I was looking at, it had this couple of sentences here that I thought was interesting. It says, the Exodus had delivered Israel from bondage. Jesus, by his Exodus, would deliver his people from a far worse bondage. So this idea that he's going to accomplish this thing, this Exodus, this freedom from bondage in Jerusalem. Luke also records that they were heavy with sleep. So the details of Luke seem to indicate, to me at least, that maybe this is taking place at night. As we said, Jesus would go up on a mountainside or wherever to pray, sometimes all night. And the details that Luke is recording here, it says they were heavy with sleep, and then it says later when they became fully awake, gives some credence to that, I guess. Maybe this is taking place at night, or maybe early morning or something like that. When I picture what's happening in Matthew and Mark, it just seems to be, I just picture it in the daytime. Just they go up there and this thing happens. But the account of Luke is that he's up there doing what he normally does, praying, and they're with him, but they're tired and they're falling asleep. But then he transforms, and this dazzling light. Think about how much more impactful that would be to see in the nighttime. Especially as you're just waking up, we can understand why the disciples were terrified, right? That 1 second there's Jesus over there praying, the next second he's shining like the sun, a dazzling light. If you were surrounded by pitch black, that would be quite a sight indeed, wouldn't it? So why Moses and Elijah? Well, it's been pointed out frequently that these represent the law and the prophets, right? Moses is the original lawgiver. He brought the law to God's people, wrote it down for them. And Elijah is the first great prophet, and kind of represents God's prophetic word. I think it's interesting, God gave the law. It's God's law. It comes through Moses. And God gave the prophets their words, and that's represented by Elijah. God is also delivering a further word and act through Jesus. But it's not just that they represent the law and the prophets. He's making a point here that one greater than Moses is there with them. One greater than Elijah is there with them, right? They're talking with Jesus. In Deuteronomy 18 and verse 15, this is Moses, and he's saying, the Lord your God will raise up a prophet like me. Remember, he foretells of the coming of the Messiah, who is Jesus. In Hebrews chapter 3 starts off all about how Moses was great. He brought the law, but then, there's one even greater than Moses who is here. And he uses that comparison of a servant versus the son. He says, Moses accomplished all things as the servant of God, but now Jesus is accomplishing those things as a son. Now the son has a greater place of honor than the servant. Elijah also did many miracles. That's one of the things that he's kind of known for, right? Him and Elisha both did many miracles. But now here's one greater than Elijah who's doing even more miracles. Right? He's greater than them in every way. But this brings up the question, how do Peter, James, and John know that this is Moses and Elijah? Haven't you wondered that? Are they wearing name tags, perhaps? Did Jesus introduce them? Hey, this Moses, Elijah. Did they pick up on clues from the conversation? How do they know? Obviously, none of these were alive at the same time as each other, and yet here they are, and Jesus is talking with them, and everyone knows who everyone is. This is an interesting thing to witness, I'm sure. Do you have any thoughts on this? Have you ever wondered how did they know who these guys were? Nate, I'm sure you've thought about it before.
I'm just going to reply but so they're in it. Well, they're involved in the church.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, good thoughts there. And that's kind of what I've always assumed as well. Nate says, this is not, they're appearing here in the physical realm, but in the spiritual realm, I don't think we're going to be having to make introductions. I think a certain level of things are known that we don't know here. So, yeah, I think that's a good point. All right, the next thing, Peter offers to make 3 tents. This appears in all of them. He says, it's good that we are here. So Peter recognizes that something amazing is happening here. In Matthew, he calls Jesus Lord, which is pretty common. And it says that he was still speaking when God begins to speak. I heard a lesson about that one time, like even God struggles to get a word in edgewise with Peter around. But he was still speaking when God begins to speak. In Mark, he calls him Rabbi, right? Which is Hebrew, teacher or master. He calls him Rabbi, and it says that he didn't know what to say because they were terrified. In Luke, he calls Jesus Master. And it says that he speaks up as the men, Moses and Elijah, are parting. So it's almost that idea as they're going away, he speaks up to say, no, we can make some shelter here. And Luke also records that he did not know what he said. And again, as he was saying it, that the cloud overshadows them. This is an interesting thing here. I can just imagine as they talk about this with the other believers. Of course, they don't bring it up until after Jesus has raised, but I can just imagine Peter recounting this story for them and laughing about, I didn't know what to say, I make him a house? What, that was really stupid of me, or something like that. And, the other guy's kind of busting his chops over this foolish idea that he has about trying to make them something. Jamie?
This idea of you're offering really to thought of the day, trying to figure out who John the Baptist is. A prophet. Okay. People ask the same thing of who do you say that I am? Say, well, Elijah. So they're making reference to the great men of God, and I don't think the apostles here are reluctant. I'm can't now for God to put stamp on other my beloved.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Excellent thoughts there. If you couldn't hear, James was just saying this is God's chance to impress upon them that there's something different between Moses and Elijah and now Jesus, right? And here Peter's trying to do a perfectly a human thing, a perfectly rational thing. If it was any other circumstance, let's make some dwellings for you here. But something much higher is going on here. Something much different is going on here. I think it's funny, this this gaffe by Peter, where he wants to make them a tent, but this idea that he didn't know what he was saying. You can imagine, right? If you were in this situation, especially as Luke tells it, you're kind of woken up, you're dazed. Here's this thing going on. Here's these people that shouldn't be here. Here's Jesus glowing, and just from not really knowing what to say, you kind of say whatever comes to mind, and that's what Peter says. Let's make 3 tents, but that's not to be. The next thing, the cloud overshadows them. The cloud comes upon them, and a voice. They all record the voice. Again, similar to what happens on Mount Sinai. This voice speaks to them. In Matthew, he says, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." In Mark, he says, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." In Luke, he says, "This is my Son, my chosen one. Listen to him." Kind of 3 different versions there. What does that make you think of? I mean, it's a callback, obviously, to something that's happened before, especially Matthew's version. "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When did that take place before? At the baptism, right? Jesus' baptism, right? The same thing happens. A voice, the Spirit descends on him, and the voice calls out from heaven. Let me ask this question. Why this message, and why at this point in time? So I can understand at the baptism, this is the start of Jesus' ministry, right? And there's this public announcement, this confirmation that Jesus is the Son, and that you should listen to him, that he's got the words. So why at this time to only these 3? Why do you think the same message? Nate, I saw your hand go up. Oh, well, no, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I meant when you were done.
Well, I'm done now. No. No, why don't you go ahead and say what you were going to say? All right.
I was just thinking about this cloud. Cloud overshadowed them, but as it overshadowed them, they were afraid. They were afraid as they entered the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole cloud idea. God brought them out of Exodus, followed the cloud. Cloud was over what? The tabernacle. And so for Peter to go, let's build 3. I think he's reverting back to where they came from.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds natural. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think he doesn't know that he's saying words. I think
Yeah.
because what's happening is it's all about to come to a close with regard to that. And so then God just corrupts it and says, don't listen to Moses, prophet, the Lord, and will be your guide.
Yeah.
It kind of is a representation of the old covenant. Off, built, and at the moment it's God, like, God put an exclamation. Maybe that's why these men are asking like 3 men. That's why they have great impact. Maybe, I'm just guessing.
Yeah, yeah. So great thoughts. In case you couldn't hear, there's a lot that was said there. Try to quickly sum up, but this idea that that the cloud, that God was literally leading them as a cloud and as a pillar of fire in the old days, right? And they had this temporary structure, this tabernacle that they moved around as the house of God. And these ideas are tied in with what's happening here. This cloud descends again. In much the same way, and Peter is responding kind of in the same way. We had a tabernacle, then let's build a tabernacle now. Let's build these temporary dwelling places for you now, and that the message, and that now these other two guys are no longer here, but my son is here. Listen to him. This idea of those things are now past. That's in the past. And that the new covenant is being brought in. Yeah, great thoughts there, Nate. Hopefully I summed that up all right. Any other thoughts, Stan? Yeah, excellent thoughts. Again, just to sum up, this idea, now I'm completely forgetting. You said a lot of great things, but again, kind of a similar thought that the old law that they cling to so closely is not going to be what's in place forever, that this new thing is coming. And he pointed out that as they talk about Elijah a little bit further down, that it says, it will restore all things, and that that's what's taking place here, and that the law is being fulfilled and is passing away, and something new is coming. Jamie, did you have a question?
I was
Or
just going
thought?
to add a comment. Started out with why now? Why at this point? And have to. Matthew 17 it starts off with 6 days later. Verses. Peter was weeping. You're not going to die. Behind you. So in that discussion, Jesus says from that time on, or it says from that time on, Jesus came and showed his disciples. You're nearing the end of Jesus. That's why I'm kidding. Or ministry. God is. And then, of course, the Hebrew writers make the argument. You had the angel, had Moses, had the prophet, but last day. So,
Yeah, excellent thoughts there. And I think I agree with you 100%. If you go back to Matthew, just before these things, Jamie's pointing out, just before these things, we've got the confession from Peter, but right after that, Jesus is explaining that his death is going to be, taking place shortly in Jerusalem. He's got a verse, chapter 16, Matthew 16, verse 21. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed and on the third day be raised. And this is where Peter takes him aside and tries to tell him, no, Jesus, that's not what's going to happen. I can only think, he's basically saying, we can prevent this. We can protect you. You don't need to die. And he's diametrically opposed to the will of God here. And Jesus has to correct him in the harshest way. Get behind me, Satan. You're a hindrance. So I think you're exactly right, Jamie. I think this is pointing, I think it's all right. It's all the same idea, but this is specifically pointing that you don't quite have it yet, You believe Jesus is the Messiah, that's good, but the end of the Messiah is not setting up a kingdom. The end of the Messiah is not even like Elijah being carried off into the clouds without having tasted death. The end of the Messiah is actually in Jerusalem on the cross. And that's where his power is going to be displayed. He's going to be raised from that, but he must first suffer and die. And they are not getting that yet. And this is God, as you said, James, this is God saying, listen to him. He's telling you what's going to happen. Listen to him. You're not getting it yet, right? Listen to him. So, yeah, excellent comments. Any other thoughts before we move on from this point? Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. That's right, yeah. So if you couldn't hear, John is bringing up 2 Peter 1, where Peter himself recounts exactly what we're talking about here, that we beheld his glory. We're eyewitnesses to what has taken place. Yeah, very good thoughts. Oh boy, so let me skip ahead here a little bit. All right, so the disciples are all afraid and terrified. Matthew records that the disciples fall on their faces. And Matthew's the only one to record Jesus' actual words as they're up on the mountain. Jesus speaks to them and says, "Rise, have no fear." It's a common thing for Jesus to give comfort to his disciples. The next thing is that Moses and Elijah are no more, and it's Jesus only who remains there. We've kind of already talked about this, but Jesus being greater than these two. And then there's this discussion at the end that Matthew and Mark recount. Luke leaves this out, but he tells them not to tell anyone until the Son of Man is raised. And in Luke, it just says that they kept silent and they told no one. But this discussion about Elijah and John the Baptist, I think we've already touched on this. This idea comes from Malachi 4, verse 5, where he says, "I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes." And just this idea that they knew and understood that Elijah needed to come, but Jesus says, yeah, he will come, but in fact, they've missed it. And just as they mistreated the prophets in the past, they've done it again. They've rejected the word that John the Baptist brought, and in fact, had him killed as well. So Elijah has already come, and they missed the message. Let me just kind of wrap this up. I always do this and ask a big question right here at the end. We don't have time to fully answer, but just something to think about. Why did Jesus transform in this way? And maybe there's lots of different answers to this, but it's proof of who he truly was, right? They're seeing him as he would be in heaven, right? This radiance, this glory that he displays. They're seeing him as he's meant to be. as we think about transforming our own lives and what's the meaning of it and what's the, what do we hope to accomplish, not everyone can see who you really are. Right? Hopefully we're acting the same basically towards everyone, but not everyone will see who you really are. Not everyone can appreciate who you are. You see in the life of Jesus that, even Jesus, with all the good that he did and the love that he showed, he was hated and reviled and attacked, accused of being demon-possessed. Not everyone's going to know or understand the message that you're bringing to the world, right? No matter how good you are, no matter how much you try to love and to help or whatever, there's going to be people who will twist those things around and misunderstand and just miss it and just miss the message. That's what Jesus had to deal with, and that's what we will have to deal with as well. So, any other thoughts as we bring this to a close? Thoughts on why Jesus transformed in this way, or any other thoughts about anything that we have talked about this morning? Nate? That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Tonight, just to sum up, this certainly changed Peter, as we read about in 2 Peter, his recounting of this, and just this revealing of God's glory, quite a thing to behold. Yeah, amen to that. Nate says, doesn't all transformation, spiritual transformation, take the will and the power of God in our lives to bring about that effect? Absolutely. Thank you guys again so much for your attention.